Hello and welcome to my channel. Try This is a series breaking down a certain game or playstyle of a game. Today we're going to be talking Commander and breaking down Zevlor Elturel Exile. The video is broken down into chapters which you can find in the description or in the timeline. I'll be briefly covering Zevlor and then cover some win conditions and how we'll get there. I'll talk about some mana base and card draw strategies. I'll discuss other synergistic cards in the deck and why I think they'll help. I'll cover some other cards I cut from my example list, why they didn't fit my list but they might fit yours. Finally, I'll move on to some budget suggestions for the deck. If you enjoy this content, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It really helps other viewers discover the content I produce and is a great way to show support. With that said, let's dive in. Zevlor is a 4/2 Tiefling warrior that costs 1 blue, black, red that has haste. When you next cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets a single opponent or a single permanent an opponent controls this turn, for each other opponent, choose that player or a permanent they control, copy that spell, and the copy targets the chosen player or permanent. Zevlor is an interesting spell matters commander that really stretches the limit of single target spells. He's especially powerful because you can usually get around counterspells with his ability. Since it's a cast trigger, we'll always resolve a few copies and our opponents will basically just be able to counter a specific instance of whatever we cast. There are a few cards like Counterflex that can get around this, but normally we'll always have a few to resolve. Targeted spells are honestly a dime a dozen, making Zevlor not only a flexible but budget-friendly commander. Though I'm not building my example list as a budget build, you should be able to find plenty of options for cards that work well with him in almost any set of Magic. Zevlor is especially powerful when we still have all of our opponents, but like Duke Older, his effectiveness wanes as opponents are removed from the game. He's actually useless in a 1v1 situation, so we want to get as much value as possible while everyone is still at the table. He was really fun to build around, and I found him to have a ton of raw value potential. Our goal is to outvalue our opponents using Zevlor's ability to either control the board state, steal cards from their decks, or finish them off with large single target X spells. Some examples of each are Banefire, Chaos Warp, and Acquire. I'll talk about some more in the high synergy card section, but jamming in a bunch of these kinds of cards is the general idea. This makes Zevlor a really control-oriented commander whose ability generally makes these cards really reliable. I'm running one Infinite Combo and Isochron Scepter and Dramatic Reversal to untap our commander and any mana rocks we have on field. Getting infinite mana this way really helps out our X-costing spells to win the game. If you're not a fan of infinite combos, then I would still consider running Isochron Scepter. It casts whatever card it exiles, which will still work with Zevlor's ability. Starting off is the auto includes in Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, and Thematic Compass. I've always found Thematic Compass to be a reliable card at any point in the game. It can help ensure land drops in early to mid game and then flip into a strictly better Mazavith to protect us from Voltron commanders and other problem creatures. Wayfarer's Bauble, the Sad Robot, and Burnished Heart are some classics that will help us get basics to field. They're all budget friendly and great cards to ramp us. Thought Vessel, Thran Dynamo, and Chromatic Lantern are 3 mana rocks that will help us pay for Zevlor's ability or some of the more expensive targeting spells in the list. Thran Dynamo especially I think is very useful for the large X cost spells we like to remove our opponents with. Fixing colors with Chromatic Lantern isn't really needed, but like I mentioned in my Goshen Tai video, it's more just here to provide some peace of mind. Ornithopter Paradise, Silver, and Iron Mirrors are some early game mana dorks that will help propel us into casting our commander or other spells. I found these cards to be really useful in most decks outside of green as either blockers or to produce mana. Jessica's Will and Rousing Refrain are 2 cards that synergize with Zevlor's ability to get us some explosive mana production. Jessica's Will also provide a ton of card advantage as we could exile up to 9 cards if we use our commander's ability. I normally don't run Jessica's Will for power reasons, but in this deck it's really too good to pass up and feeds the X cost finishing spells. Goblin Electromancer and Wizards of Thay will give our instant and sorcery spells some cost reduction. The Wizards of Thay is a pretty cool card. It gives us some temporary bonus reduction in combat with the Myriad ability, but especially powerful because it gives our sorcery cards flash while it's out. Last up is Dockside Extortionist and Stormkiln Artist as 2 cards that will provide plenty of treasures. The Artist is especially useful as the Magecraft will trigger with all the copies Zevlor makes. Archmage Emirius and Rhystic Study are 2 heavy hitters for card draw on this list. Like Stormkiln Artist, Emirius synergizes very well with our commander duplicating most of our spells. There are a total of 36 instant and sorcery spells in the deck, so Emirius should provide plenty of card draw without copying anything. Peek and Get Probe are 2 cards we can copy with Zevlor. Getting essentially 3 cards for 3 mana is pretty good, and being able to check our opponent's hand is a nice bonus. Seagate Restoration and Brainstorm are solid blue cards that provide card advantage. Seagate also doubles as a land, which is very useful in a pinch if we're getting screwed. Cruel Ultimatum does a variety of things but can draw us up to 9 cards with Zevlor's ability. It can be a pretty heavy power swing in our favor, as each opponent will be out of creature, cards, and life while we get multiple creatures back from the yard to hand, lots of card draw, and a ton of life. I'm only running 13 creatures besides Zevlor, but the other effects make this card well worth it. Last up is Expansion Explosion, which we can double up with our commander as a finishing card for us. Being able to copy spells, synergize with our commander, and draw us cards, or kill our opponents makes it probably the best overall card in the deck. The card draw section is pretty light for this deck, but since each one provides us with quite a bit of value, they should be able to snowball into each other. I'm running Magerite Stone, Illusionist Bracers, and Twinning Staff, which are all ways to squeeze out some more value from our commander. The stone lets us cheaply untap him, which is useful when we get extra mana from cards like Jessica's Will. The Bracers and Twinning Staff basically end up doing the same thing in most cases. The original opponent who gets targeted won't be affected, but the other opponents will get additional copies being sent at them. I normally don't cover removal spells, but some good examples are Pognify, Resculpt, and the previously mentioned Chaos Warp. Removal and other single target spells are all over Magic's history in these colors, so there's plenty of options that would fit with Zevlor. He works with any card that can target any type of permanent, so honestly the options are almost endless. Though Removal Tribal can be a bit mean, I think you could replace just about any non-budget card with something like Murder or any other single target chaff. Though I'm not running a lot of draw spells, I'm making up for it with other value cards. Cards like Acquire, Bribery, and Teleman's Performance will all get us cards from our opponent's library. In the case of Acquire and Bribery, we can fetch some utility cards from our opponents to fit whatever need we currently have. Like them is Inevitable Betrayal, Praetor's Grasp, and Stolen Goods. Praetor's Grasp will let us get whatever we want, but remember we still need to pay the right mana colors for whatever we take. Even so, it's a great card that's cheap to cast. Previously mentioned Banefire along with Electro Dominance and Rakdos' Return are all great finishing cards in the list. Banefire is especially nice since it actually is uncounterable when X is 5 or more. It should be difficult for our opponents to answer unless they have something like Teferi's Protection. Clone Legion and Star of Extinction are two more expensive to cast but amazing cards in this list. Clone Legion can provide some explosive board states if our opponents are doing well. Star of Extinction might be a little mean as we need to blow up some lands, but it's sort of an upgraded blast act in this deck that also hits planeswalkers. Outside of the usual black tutors that I run, I'm also running Spellseeker, Mystical Tutor, and Solve the Equation to get whatever instant and sorcery I need. Though Spellseeker can only get ones 2 CMC or less, that's most of the X spells we have and the other removal cards. Tutors are generally expensive and really up the power of your deck, so if you're trying to build more around a budget or want to lower the power to fit your pod, then these and the other black tutors might be good things to cut. I think Solve the Equation would still be worth running though, since it's pretty budget friendly. The cutting room floor is where I talk about some cards around or over $10 at the time of recording that I cut from my list for various reasons but are worth mentioning to run. Though these cards didn't find a home in my list, they might find a home in yours. First up is Primal Amulet, which not only gives us a cost reduction but flips into a land that copies our instant or sorcery spells. I felt like I was doing enough copying in this deck, but it does give us an additional copy for the initial opponent we target with our spells. I think it could be very helpful in a 1v1 situation, but it really isn't needed in early in the mid game. Like the Amulet is the new Jin Cataxis and Thousand Year Storm. These will both copy the initial spells so we can target the original opponent if we wish. I cut them for the same reason as the Amulet, but like the Amulet, both will help in a 1v1 situation. I think they would both paint too much of a target on you for honestly little value overall. The list isn't really built to take advantage of Storm's capabilities, so it might not help you too much. With a little tweaking, it could be a great include though. Darksteel Plate and Sword of Hearth and Home are two fantastic equipment cards that would be welcome. The sword could ramp us and flicker Zevlor. Since he has haste, we'd be able to get a second activation in the same main phase or just on our opponent's turns. The plate is really useful as Zevlor will probably get removed often. I didn't have a huge issue in my test games, but after getting some initial value, he'd often get targeted. My counter spells, tutors, and protection cards like Swiftfoot Boots was enough for me, but this is a solid card to keep him on the field. Last up is Professor Onyx as a really good burn effect in the deck. Using Zevlor's ability, we can drain our opponents for up to 6 life, which is a pretty significant amount. All of her loyalty abilities are pretty useful, also making her an overall great card for the list. I thought that 6 mana for a Planeswalker I'd struggle to protect wasn't really worth it. I would rather save mana to cast something else on my turn using Zevlor. I also didn't think she'd stick around very long with only running 14 creatures including our commander. Though I think if your list has more ways to protect her, then she's probably worth running. First up is other burn effect cards like Gutter Snipe and Electrostatic Field. This deck isn't a true Spellslinger deck to really burn with cards like these. Decks like Feather take far more advantage of them, but they're good blockers and budget friendly. Next up is Chaos Wand and Wand of Wonders, as two cards that can steal instant or sorcery cards from our opponents. If you wanted to copy those spells, you'd have to activate Zevlor before you activate these cards, making it a bit of a gamble. However, they're fun to use and you could potentially get a ton of value from them. Worst Fears and Reveries Rebuke are 2 cards we can use to control a board state. It's really up to you on how you feel like your pod will react, but it's a very powerful effect that synergizes well with Zevlor. Karak the Thumbless and Mystic Sanctuary are 2 utility cards that work really well in spellslinging decks. My mana base doesn't really run a ton of islands, but Mystic Sanctuary could be a good replacement for something like City of Brass. Kark could give us some additional value with our spells. Since we copy on cast, the other opponents will always get the spells regardless of how the coin flip turns out. Either we get another copy or we can cast it again. Win-win if you ask me. I didn't cover every card in this deck or every suggestion I have for Zevlor, so if you'd like to see the rest, check out the link in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider clicking the like button and subscribing to the channel. Comment below on cards you think synergize well with this commander, and if you have any suggestions for commanders to build in the future. Thank you so much for watching, good luck, and have fun.